Good evening. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is March 23rd, 2022. I'm joined, as usual, by Western Standard news editor and the head of our Calgary bureau, Dave Naylor. How you doing, Dave?
I'm well, Derek. Thank you.
And I'm visiting, I guess, his studio. It's actually my first appearance in the news studio here at our new Calgary headquarters. Western Standard opinion and broadcast editor and host of Triggered, Cory Morgan. How you doing, Cory?
Very good. Good to be back in again today.
Thank you for inviting me to your space.
I've broken it in, so I can share
it. It's much nicer. We're not sitting on top of each other here. It's much better. Okay, well, very important things going on today that we've got on the show is Jason Kenney stacking the deck. New last-minute rule changes for the leadership review vote of UCP Premier Jason Kenney. We're going to get into it, but it appears very much so that he was headed for a defeat in the leadership vote scheduled for April 9th. Radical overhaul in the rules that I think many are very fairly saying is going to stack the deck to try and keep him in power here. Quite extraordinary, and we're going to get into it in some depth. And of course, the NDP Liberal axis of weasels, trademark Sun News Network, credit where credit's due. The Sun used to have a lot of great headlines, really good stuff. And not so much since you left the Sun, Dave, I got to say.
Sorry, I do have to credit you. It wasn't Sun News Network. That was the old TV station.
Sorry.
That's gone. Post Media.
Yeah, Post Media, but on the Sun chain. The Sun chain, which is a part of Post Media now. Yeah. The axis of weasels, the new Liberal NDP alliance. We're going to talk about some of the politics around it and what it means for Westerners. Before we get going, of course, we need to pay our bills. And paying the bills means acknowledging one of our keystone sponsors, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, the CSSA. CSSA is a great organization that's been standing up for the rights of law-abiding firearms owners in Canada for a very long time. I've been a member for well over a decade, long before they were a sponsor of the show. I've been proud to call myself a member of the Canadian Shooting Sports Association because they stand up for my right to safely own, purchase, and use firearms as I see fit. They're out there crafting smart legislation for the politicians. They're lobbying them on the issues. And importantly, when the politicians don't listen, they try to get out there and educate the public so that the politicians will follow the lead of smart firearms legislation in Canada. At least we hope at the best of times. It often doesn't work out that case, but I just shudder to think what would happen if we didn't have great organizations like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association standing on guard for thee and your right to be a legal firearms owner in Canada. Of course, we also want to thank all of our Western Standard members for your support. Without your support, we couldn't have built this fancy new studio. We're taking every dollar that comes in new memberships and we're reinvesting it into a better product, a better Western Standard, giving it back to you in the form of better productions, better news coverage, more in-depth news coverage. We've hired a ton of new reporters right across Canada, right across the West, and in fact now in our new Ottawa bureau that's been established, we're really going head-to-head with the mainstream media with this stuff now, and we're able to do it because of people like you who are signing up as Western Standard members. We're very grateful for your support, so we can give you bailout-free, independent Western media. Let's get into it. The reason you're all here is Kenney stacking the deck. I mean, the question almost answers itself. Of course, Kenney, if asked, I'm sure will probably not say yes. But well, let's go through the history of this. We had 22 CAs demand a special general meeting, essentially to recall Kenney on his leadership. They wanted to vote on his leadership, and they wanted polling stations across Alberta. Kenney's people on the board said no. They even tried to push through change of the party's constitution at their AGM in the fall in November. That failed. They go through and they said, fine, you can have your vote, but it's going to be a vote just in Red Deer on a single day. That they believed, I think, would play to Kenney's strengths. He's known as a great organizer, a great fundraiser. Turned out that was a terrible idea for Jason Kenney. He might be a good organizer and fundraiser, but his opponents are much more motivated than his supporters. And they were, I've seen the numbers I've seen the internal numbers from inside the party and inside groups like Take Back Alberta that are working to oust Kenney. He was going to lose. On the other side of a door over there, we've got an office pool. And I bet Kenney was going to get 42%. I'm not so sure anymore because they've just radically changed the rules, I think, to keep them there. Dave, why don't you tell us about the new rules that were announced by the party today on the Kenney Leadership Review?
Well, it's a shambles, Derek, an utter shambles. They've announced it's going to be a mail-in ballot. They've still cut off the membership as of March 19th, I believe it was. So those people that didn't want to pay the registration fee to go to Red Deer and $99 to get up there, they just didn't bother to fill in the registration or to become a member. So all those people have been excluded. Mainly those would be the rural people who thought it was going to be too far of a drive. Yeah. So the big Red Deer gathering is off. They're still going to hold a special general meeting, but it's going to be done virtually. They're going to refund the money. So I think Cory said it's $1.5 million. They've got to refund to people. Or of course, if you wanted to just make your $99 a donation to the party, they are gladly offering you that option. So it's been met with indignation across on the, shall we say, the enemy benches. Brian Jean, is Kenney's biggest foe, has issued a statement calling it a travesty and completely against UCP rules. I'm sure a lot of the those 22 constituency associations that you talked about earlier, they've got to be pulling their hair out too. So all sorts of questions around mail-in balloting that we'll get into, and how accurate it is, how safe a process it is. But it's right now the UCP is just a party in shambles.
They're also potentially going to face lawsuits here. We're going to have, I think, some stories coming up on that, but I'm aware in the background right now of some legal challenges that are being mounted. Remember, the UCP is essentially a private not-for-profit corporation or a society under the Societies Act in Alberta, and its members or shareholders effectively can sue it if they're not following their own bylaws. I know there's people combing through those bylaws right now because, they're not just changing the rules of the game. I think they just change what the game is. When you have a political contest, you're going to play within what the rules are to maximize your outcome. And if the rules are you have to get your people to become a member by a certain date, and then they have to pay $99 by a certain date, then they have got to drive somewhere on that specific date, vote, and go back. That's one set of rules. But now it's just mail-in vote. So who's going to vote, how they're going to vote, when they can vote is all different. It's not just changing the rules of a football game. It's like they played football for 3 quarters, and the last quarter they're going to play basketball. It's just a totally different game.
And they were considering moving it to 3 different cities. Yeah. Edmonton, Red Deer, and Calgary, which would have made sense. I mean, that hotel in Red Deer, the Cambridge that they were going to put it in, only has a capacity of 2,000 people. Yeah. So that would seem to me to be a reasonable.
That would have been changing the rules in the game, but I think it would have been reasonable under the circumstances.
It would have been more acceptable.
You couldn't have had 15 or 20,000 people piling into a Red Deer hotel on a single afternoon, not even the morning. Yeah. You couldn't have done it. They had to do something. But as I say, you give them an inch, they take a mile. They had to be given an inch here. I think something had to be done. Everybody would reasonably agree something had to be done. It was a Western Standard exclusive story. The party was planning on just adding a voting station in Calgary and in Edmonton. They would have voting on 3 separate days so the party staff could move between the cities. That seemed to me, I know some people were crying foul at that, but I said, look, you have to do something. And that seems, it probably gives a bit of an advantage to Kenney, but it seemed reasonable. This is totally different, though. Yeah. Cory, I want to come to you next. Do you think this is this completely, it's not even changing the rules, it's just a totally new set of rules. The old set of rules, they've even just removed from their website.
And I've had people copied already. Yeah. Bylaws say in person. This isn't something that's ambiguous. For an SGM, it's supposed to be in person.
Well, if there are rules in advance, I'd have to look at the rules, but I know the UCP was created by virtual or mail-in and online voting. The referendum that created the UCP was done, at least on the Wild Rose side, by a mail-in and online SGM. There were ways of doing it. But I want to come to you now about, is this going to significantly change the outcome? Is this going to give Kenney a significant advantage over what appeared to be the likely outcome under the rules that they just got rid of.
I don't know if it is, but it's certainly what they want it to do. Now they can work on those $10 members that they feel there must be a pool that they're going to be able to galvanize and get to vote in favor of Kenney. They've got to know that a move like this. So I bet you there's a number of people who spent the $99 and were planning on supporting Kenney, and this has put them off. They said, enough of these political games. Like, this is unprincipled. This is not what I've signed up for. This is a huge gamble. It's a sign of desperation. My bigger concern, though, is the logistics. And I'll be talking to Danielle Smith on the show tomorrow on my show. And I talked to her briefly today about it. She said it's given her PTSD, the memories, because I was at the Wild Rose Party when she got elected as the leader. My wife Jane was the executive director, and we did a mail-in balloting for that. There was about 13,000 eligible members. To get 13,000 uniquely marked envelopes out to people, filled out correctly, sent back, stored, counted, we had months to do it. And it was still a logistical nightmare. If these guys think they're going to do 20,000 of them in 2 and some weeks when they just made that decision today, I don't see how it's even physically possible. This is a recipe for a disaster. That
well, it could be a lot more than 20,000 now, because people no longer need to go to Red Deer. The registration thing is over. Just anyone who's a member can vote.
Yeah.
It could be well over 20. This could easily hit 40.
They have to get a ballot to every person who's eligible out, and then whatever amount gets back. And then, I mean, that was part of the problems. We had questions with the Wild Rose afterwards because we had ballots showing up weeks after the leadership race because of Canada Post. I mean,
well, they would need to get those ballots out now.
Yeah.
Like, by the time you need to print them, get them out, people have to have them for some time, especially people in rural areas.
Well,
people in rural areas might not have time to get their stuff and return it in time.
You need means of controls and ways to make sure there hasn't been rigging or things like that. You need uniquely numbered ballots. We salted membership lists. We did things to make sure this thing was on the up and up. And that took months of planning and work, and on a smaller scale than what the UCP is talking about. I don't see how they can pull this off. It's going to be a catastrophe, and nobody's going to trust the results of this. Nobody.
Well, okay. So we're gonna get to that in a bit about trusting the results. I still want to go with kind of the motivations around this. Who's the winner? Who wins and who loses out of this change? We've seen in the last few weeks, and really ramping up lately, Kenney seems not to be focusing as much on the general UCP membership, but he's targeting religious and ethnic minority groups, really making the case for them to come out. They often play a fairly large role in Alberta politics, particularly in inter-party politics, in nominations and leadership races. Having the right connections in those communities can be very, very influential in these races. Kenney has spent a huge part of his career courting ethnic and religious minority groups. He's very good at it. But we've seen. Actually, I don't know if Nico can pull up the video in a second, but that video of Kenney speaking to a gathering of some minorities in Northeast Calgary, where he was making the case that the people opposing him are racists. And he pointed to one or two guys, Todd Beasley and Brian Jean, says these guys are racists, and more or less tried to paint all of his opponents as like being these guys. These are the guys against him. And if you oppose Kenney, his opponents are racist. So therefore, if you want to stop racism, you have to support me. He's saying, I'm going to protect you guys from these racists, these extremists, these hate-filled people. He's been making the case to these groups that are clustered in large measure, not entirely by any means, but in large measure, Northeast Calgary and Southwest Edmonton. I thought setting up new polling locations in those two cities was probably trying to make it easier for them, because if they're not dedicated hardcore members and they're just kind of coming out for this particular event, get them to Red Deer and paying $100, that's a tough ask. But now I think it gets very easy for them to vote, and there's still questions. Actually, we'll get into the security of the vote in a bit, but I want to talk about the role of the ethnic vote. Here, Nico, do we have that video available? Okay, let's roll that video.
This is leading the country. We are keeping our commitments. There is a new boom happening in this province. So much great stuff happening, but on April the 9th, it could all go into the ditch. It could all go offside if this government is disrupted. And let me be honest, if voices of extreme views end up destabilizing the mainstream politics of this province, I'm going to do something tonight that will be controversial, but is necessary. You need to know what the stakes are. Usman referred to it. Now, I committed, when I became leader of this party, that we would not we believe in freedom of speech, we believe in political diversity. But we are committed to this being a party rooted in the mainstream values of Alberta, a belief in human dignity, and an opposition to racism. And that is why I committed that we would have a rigorous screening process for people who apply to be candidates for this party. In the last election cycle, we did that. And there were a number of people that had views or statements that were not consistent with our Alberta values. Some of whom are actively organizing to destabilize my leadership, this party, and this government right now. One of those individuals is a guy named Todd Beasley. He was excluded as a candidate in Brooks Medicine Hat because he had posted the following on Facebook, and my apologies to our Muslim friends. He said, quotes, "Islam is not a religion of peace. It is cruel, revolting, racist, oppressive, and has no legitimate basis. The Mongols would have done mankind a favor if they snuffed this evil when they had the chance." There's another individual, he's running around the province organizing meetings like this to ask people to come to Red Deer on April the 9th to destabilize this government. This is not an opinion, this is a matter of fact. There's another individual who was just applied for a candidacy and was excluded, who had posted on social media that Islam is, I'm quoting, quotes, "Islam is a death cult." We excluded this person from being a candidate. And there are many, many more like this. We have an individual who was just elected in Fort McMurray, who said he was running against a nomination against Dr. Gogo, a Canadian of Nigerian origin. And this individual said that Kenney is pushing a Nigerian economist, not a Canadian, not an Albertan, but implying that that person doesn't belong here. Folks, I'll tell you what does not belong. As long as I am leader of this party and premier of Alberta, voices of racism, hatred, and intolerance will find no home in this party or this government. So I'm sorry if I've offended anybody, but you need to know that the stakes are high. I respect Alberta democracy, but this party must be a party that is in the mainstream. If there are people with views like that, they can go and run as independents and run on other party tickets, but not in this party. And that is part of what is on the ballot on April the 9th. I want to thank you for being here, and I'll just close with 3 things I've learned in the last 2 years. First, it is a lot harder to unite than it is to divide. Secondly, it's a lot harder to lead through multiple once-in-a-century crises.
All right, well, let's
than to sit on the sidelines chirping
move on
and
from there,
criticizing.
Nico.
And thirdly, it is a lot.
Okay, well, so there was Jason Kenney speaking. That was, it's a long speech, but we wanted to make sure we give the full context of it. We could have given it a shorter clip. I wanted to give the full context here. I don't like it when anyone takes me out of context. We need to be fair to others. So, he was speaking about comments. He didn't name Brian Jean, but, the newly elected guy in Brian Jean.
Quite easy to figure that out.
So racist that he got vetted out of being a candidate, right? Oh, no, he was allowed to run anyway. Yeah, well, what Brian Jean said there about a Nigerian economist, I think it was a bit inappropriate, but I really wouldn't call. I've got my own feelings and critiques of Brian Jean. Racism is not one of them. Todd Beasley, I think some of his comments were probably definitely over.
Beasley's not a player.
No.
Come on, let's not pretend he has much to do at all with it. The movement.
Yeah. Not meaning to be insulting to the guy, but like he's a guy in Medicine Hat. He is probably not in the top 10, top 100 major organizers against Kenney here. He is just one guy who is against Kenney. So what Kenney is doing here is saying, these guys are racists and they oppose me. Therefore, my opponents are racists. And he's making this case to some minority groups that he's the great defender of them. Without him, a bunch of Klansmen are going to be running Alberta, and that's been his tactic. He needs these groups to vote. Membership cutoff is already done, unless there's some funny way of getting memberships to them retroactively. But let's remember, there's still an active case of voter fraud ongoing from the RCMP dating back to the 2017 UCP leadership campaign of Jason Kenney. None of that's proven in court. These are still allegations at this point, but it's still an active and ongoing RCMP investigation. Maybe nothing will come of that. Maybe that was all just a fugazi. But it is a real, at the very least, it's a real fear of a lot of UCP members and Kenney critics. And mail-in votes are fairly susceptible to fraud. It doesn't mean they are. Like they are a legitimate tool, but they are susceptible to fraud, and it's on such a short timeline here. I'll put this to either of you. How concerned should we be that that UCP members might not be able to trust the results of a mail-in vote done like this?
Well, the only thing they could have done worse was bring in Dominion voting machines, right? I mean, they've changed the rules so many times that they've just shown they can't be trusted. And say Kenney wins by 51%, and he said he's going to stay on with that lower number. It can't be trusted. It can't. And then how does he go on uniting the party that way with such a low, such a low mandate?
And we're gonna come to that about what happens in some of the scenarios. We're gonna come back to that. Cory, how big a role do you think Kenney's play to kind of stir up some fear in some minority communities, many of which are coming from places where they have faced persecution in the past, but
playing on real fears? They have legitimate ones.
Yeah.
They've probably, Northeast Calgary, New Canadians, they have faced some racism. They face some jerks on the streets, and if they fear that this is a movement of those sorts of jerks, then it could be effective in galvanizing them. But it's a low brow tactic. It's one that's been used against Kenney before. And it's ridiculous. It may be effective in galvanizing, New Canadians in certain regions where there's a large concentrations of with ECP memberships. But at the same time, the rest of the membership is getting more and more furious with this kind of crap play, this stuff we expect of Notley, this stuff we expect of Trudeau, and then to see. Well,
this sounds a heck of a lot like a certain Trudeau quote about the unvaccinated being racist, misogynists, and extremists. I mean, what was Kenney's quote? Driven by racism, hatred, and extremism. It's
same playbook.
It's the same damn thing. Maybe this will be successful in getting some of them out, but the membership's already sold. You can't sell new memberships. You can just get the current ones to vote at this point.
Not every existing member is up there.
No, and it kind of reminds me a bit of Nenshi in his last election when things could have gone either way. He played the race card too.
Yeah, he did the exact same thing. And I mean, there's the other thing that is worrisome, and I don't anticipate they'd be crazy, but anybody who's dealt with Northeast Calgary nominations and races and membership-based things, it's because of different past values. I mean, it's a delicate area to talk about, but every party knows about it. It's a challenging area to work. There's a lot of people who feel rules are something to be stretched. We dealt with that in what used to be Calgary Cross with the Wild Rose. We had 4 nominees, 3 of them, it sold 5,000 memberships each, and they were all the exact same 5,000 people. So we had 15,000 membership applications. We cross-checked, same addresses. We went to households that supposedly had 20 people in them, like to disqualify the people, because we want to be very careful. It's very delicate up there. We had Vidor and others door knocking and going and physically checking to be absolutely sure. And sure enough, there was a gross amount of abuse of membership lists, of false peoples, of names living in houses that didn't exist.
Well, that's I think the big reason that the people who brought in this recall against Kenney demanding a leadership review vote here, they wanted an in-person vote.
Yeah.
Personally, I thought that online balloting is pretty modern political parties, and you can do that. It is still subject to fraud. Like there is voter fraud investigations, as we were just talking about, going back to Kenney's 2017 leadership campaign. But they wanted in-person voting, but voting stations across Alberta, and the party said no at Kenney's behest because of the reasons we talked about. They thought having a single event in Calgary would make it harder for people from distant rural areas to travel to. Big registration fee, so it would be an organizational fee. It'd be like the 2016 PC or 2016 or 17 PC leadership convention that led up to the merger of the Wild Rose, a delegated convention, very complicated, where organizing prowess is more important than anything else. That's what they were hoping for. But the thing is, they had this there's a motivation or enthusiasm gap between Kenney's supporters and opponents. If you talk to Kenney supporters, there's a reason they pretty much don't have volunteers. There's a reason they're going around to the staff in the Premier's office and Minister's offices saying, you're expected to take Friday or Thursday off or something and make phone calls. They're not getting real volunteers. If you talk to Kenney's supporters, such as they are, it's, their answers are normally, well, it was a tough time to govern, and I think he did, and it has been a tough time to govern. But, it's a tough time, and I think, he maybe made some mistakes, but I think he made the best of it. That's the defense of Kenney. His opponents are, he took my rights away. He locked me in my house. He closed down my church. He arrested my pastor. He had kids beat up for playing hockey. He destroyed businesses. It's much more, his opponents are much, much more motivated to pay $100, drive potentially hours and hours, stand in line for more hours, and then drive home, as opposed to his supporters. So that plan backfired, and that's why the rules are changing. If that original plan was still working for Kenney, I guarantee you, no matter how many people registered, they'd still be voting in Red Deer. Maybe they just would have added more polling stations in Red Deer and surrounding Red Deer. But okay, so let's talk about what happens in some of the different circumstances here. I think Kenney could still lose. He very much could still lose. I think this is the first indirect sign we've seen from Kenney acknowledging he could lose. The rules would not have changed otherwise, at least in this significant a way. But let's say he manages to hold on. He gets 51, he gets 55. I mean, no leader of any party has ever stayed on with numbers anywhere close to that. Normally you need well into the 70s to stay on as the leader of a party. But let's say, and I take him at his word on this. He gets 51, he's going to stay. I believe that he'll try. Let's go. I'll go through either of you. I'll start with you, Cory, about what do you think the circumstances are going to be? What happens if Kenney gets 51, 55, 56, and he says, that's it. People have spoken. I'm staying. What happens now?
The party tears in two. There's going to be mass floor crossings. There's going to be members supporting whatever new entity is presented to them. I mean, as we know, you only need 4 sitting MLAs in order to form an official party in the legislature. So, I mean, if you get 10 or 15 or 20 of them, and I could very conceivably see that, say, you know what, we're out. Members are going to move towards M support, and we're right very well close back to that old Wild Rose PC sort of scenario we were looking at, and Rachel Notley's going to grin ear to ear.
Dave, Kenney hangs on. What do you think happens?
Well, I think then it becomes real for MLAs that we're a year away from the next election. We're going to get slaughtered. We're going to lose our jobs, and we're going to be, we're not going to be on the public teat anymore. And by then, panic stations will set in. And I think Cory's right. I think you'll see mass floor crossings. Maybe all this leads into Drew Barnes' big plan of a new rural conservative party, if he gets enough, support from rural MLAs. It's NDP are just sitting there, just laughing. They don't even have to do anything these days.
And, I've talked to tons of UCP MLAs who will tell me, can't use their name here, but they'll tell me I'm never running under Jason Kenney. It actually goes the other way around too. Kenney will never sign their nomination papers. He will, Kenney purged a large number of the more adamant Wild Rosers, not getting too much into this because I've got a conflict of interest in that topic, but he purged a lot of the more hardcore Wild Rosers, Pat Steer, Wayne Anderson, Rick Strankman, a number of Wild Rosers before the last election. He just simply puts people in place with favorable rules for nominations to take them out, or just disqualifies them, period, from running. Kenney's got a clean house if he stays as leader, and he's not going to allow a lot of these people to seek nominations. They're going to know this. And those MLAs will either retire or have to run with a new Conservative Party, because independents don't get elected in Alberta. I know some of you like independents, but you all say you like independents, but you never vote for them. So they're going to have to get with another party on the right here. It could be Wild Rose or called something else. Who knows what it is? Okay, well, we're going to keep it moving along here. The NDP Liberal axis of weasels, again, front cover of the Sun. Every once in a while, they get those good old-fashioned Sun headlines back. Dave, tell us about the axis of weasels.
Well, 2 of Canada's top weasels, Justin Trudeau and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, apparently had high-level talks and decided, okay, let's sort of it's not really a coalition, but a very strong alliance, and that the NDP will support the Liberals in all confidence motions, and in return they get some of the stuff that the NDP have been after for years, including possibly a $5 billion dental care program, free dentistry for kids with families.
If this happens, I'm canceling benefits for all you guys.
Yeah, well,
if the Western Standard is paying for this in taxes, I ain't paying for it in benefits on top. Enjoy your government dental plans.
there you go. Yeah, we can all go to Mexico and talk to Cory's dentist. And the other sort of important news today is that they're going to introduce a law banning replacement workers. You know, the so-called scabs, who are critical to keeping companies operating during these labor movements. So it's a deal that you know, if everybody sticks to their word, is going to keep the Trudeau administration in place for their entire reign. And you know, we've all sort of said that Jagmeet Singh has been deputy prime minister for a while. It puts him in the position of power that he was probably as close to as he was ever going to get, and you know, probably infuriates a lot of his base. So.
Well, let's talk about the politics of it. This is not the first time we've seen an agreement like this in Canada. We've seen it at the provincial level a number of times in different provinces in Canada. Federally, we've seen things close-ish, but generally not this formalized. Again, it's not a technical coalition. Coalition would have the NDP with seats in cabinet. The government, the capital G government, is a form. The government is not the House of Commons. It's not even necessarily the governing party. It's the cabinet. So it's not technically a coalition government, but it's pretty damn close. So we'll call it a governing alliance. Very often when this happens, the junior partner gets screwed in the next election. This happened in Ontario when Bob Rae's NDP was back supporting Bill Davison's, I think, Liberals in Ontario. This is back in the 80s. It happened in BC when the Green Party there was backing John Horgan's minority NDP government, and then they broke the deal and screwed the Greens. And very famously, it happened in the United Kingdom, where you had the Liberal Democrats in a formal coalition government with David Cameron's Conservative Party. The smaller party often does very poorly in the election that comes after, because they can't take a ton of the credit for everything that happened, but they get all the blame. They can't say that was us, because it's kind of everybody, but then they get a lot of the bad. And so it's very dangerous for smaller parties in these coalitions. Cory, do you think there's any major political risk for the NDP in doing this kind of deal with Trudeau?
I think there's a lot, but I think maybe Jagmeet Singh is at the point where he knows it and doesn't care. Like, this is the most power the NDP can ever hope for. And look at the concessions. I mean, that's an NDP wish list that's being imposed. Dental pharmacare is in there as well. I mean, there's some strong labor commitments, housing for, you know, low-income housing and things like that. If he could get a bunch of those in and gets wiped out the next time around, he's probably getting tired anyways, and then he can retire, you know, on his expensive rocking chair and look at his Rolex and buy the time away. Unfortunately, for the ones that get screwed are the ideological NDP members who had to sit through this coalition until it becomes inconvenient for Justin. And as soon as Trudeau thinks there's a winning element for an election, he'll call a snap one. They're not going to make it.
Well, let's remember, both will. Coalitions or alliances of this kind only last so long as both are happy on a policy level and both don't see any political advantage to dissolving the relationship. In British Columbia, the Greens, I think, enjoyed the policy relationship with the minority NDP of John Horgan until John Horgan saw, I'm high in the polls. Everybody likes lockdowns on the left in BC. He broke the agreement unilaterally, called the election. The Greens got trounced. But maybe it's a potential win for the NDP here, because the NDP might now be able to go back to its supporters and say, we're not just a party of yelling about socialism. We're giving you some. We're giving you social justice. We're giving you woke policy. We're giving you green policy. We're a part of making the Liberals doing these things. It might be able to go the other way around, and that they can say, hey, it's not a waste to vote for the NDP now.
Yeah. My concern now is the government has to do something about inflation. They have to. It's out of control. And all these NDP-led promises of spending billions and billions of dollars, pharmacare and dental care and God knows what else they've got cooking. That's not going to stop inflation. That's going to make it worse.
They're going to borrow more. Yeah.
It's going, you know, and the printing presses are going to have to go into double overtime as opposed to
Well, look,
just overtime.
there's already no money. The government's already running incredible deficits. We just had the debt clock come through Calgary today. When I was with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation in a previous life, I toured it around, and I was looking at some old pictures of that debt clock tour, and it was sitting around 500-something billion. And I remember how pissed off I was, Stephen Harper. Oh, you socialist, Stephen, you spent so much money. You're borrowing so much. You're just driving up this debt clock. The debt clock is twice that now. It's literally broken. They've broken the debt clock. They had to retire the debt clock that I toured around the country with because it ran out of digits. They had to get a whole new debt clock to add digits to the damn thing. There is no money to be spent. So, you know, I think three of us would agree from a policy perspective, this is terrible. But I want to talk about the odd man out in this marriage. Let's talk about the Conservatives. I've argued for some time that one of the problems the Conservatives had is that because they've been in minority governments, they have not really had the time to do serious genuflection, to really reflect what the hell does this party stand for? What does it mean to be a conservative in the 21st century, in the 2020s? You know, who are we? What do we want to achieve beyond power? And you can't really do that when you expect an election around the corner at any time. I want your thoughts now on, is this potentially a good thing for the Conservative Party, both in that in the next election they'll be able to maybe lump the NDP and Liberals together, Liberal, Tory swing voters will be afraid of this, but also just in terms of their getting their own crap together internally. Is this good for the Conservative Party? Let's start with you, Dave.
I think so. When they initially set September for their leadership vote, I thought, holy cow, what's to stop Justin from calling an election in July? And they'd be still without a leader, even though the campaign's been going on for months. So I think it is good that it's going to make a robust leadership campaign. There's going to be lots of debate, lots of issues. There's already everybody in the dog catcher running for it already. We'll see what the final cut is. But yeah, I think it's good for the party to have more time to talk about things.
I'm with you. And it gives them some breathing space to, and a very clear thing to build an opposition to. They could say we are the responsible right. We are looking for some conservative, fiscal responsible principles here, and they've got a lot of big targets they can point at and appeal to Canadians, saying, you know, we're sticking to the issues that are important, and we're going to, you know, get the budget and ballots by 2100 or something, as opposed to the Liberal plan. But yeah, I think it's good for the Conservatives.
The Liberals will be lucky to do that.
That was about Aaron O'Toole's plan.
What was it, 2070? The PBO said.
Yeah, they got time to think about it now, so I think it will be good for them, actually.
Okay. Well, we're going to end with a sponsor note from our sponsor, Bitcoin Well. Bitcoin Well is actually the first major sponsor of the Western Standard. Well, I'd call them almost a founding sponsor, really, as we're taking off and getting serious as a media company here. Bitcoin Well is something that everyone here at the Western Standard is using. They're making digital currency easy and accessible for you. It shouldn't be as scary as you might think it is. You should check out Bitcoin Well. They're going to run you through tutorials about how you can get into buying Bitcoin. We're just talking about inflation now. You don't have to use the Canadian peso anymore. You can use real hard currency in the form of Bitcoin. So everyone here at the Western Standard is using it. We've got something called a Bitcoin savings plan for our employees. At the end of every month, we allow our employees to get up to 2% of their salary paid in Bitcoin. And the Western Standard matches 2% of that. You know, some companies do that with RSPs. Well, we do it with Bitcoin because we're trying to encourage savings of good digital currencies that are not going to lose their value. They can't be seized by despotic governments. This is money that the government cannot touch, no matter how hard they try. So I'm a big believer in Bitcoin, but Bitcoin Well is really what's made it accessible. I've been fascinated by Bitcoin for a long time, but getting with Bitcoin Well has really been what's been able to make it accessible, not just for me, but for everyone working here at the Western Standard. And I'd really encourage all of our listeners, all of our readers, our members, to seriously check it out. This is, I think, a big part of your financial portfolio now as a hedge against inflation, a great way to store value and keep your money out of the dirty hands of the government. Well, gentlemen, I've enjoyed doing this in our new studio, much more spacious.
Yeah, your knee hasn't banged into mine. 28 times.
Well, you
like
like
it used to.
You like it.
Not really.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dave, Cory, and all of you for joining us today. God bless.